Hello, everyone. We're here for some more reading. The Color of Money, Black Banks, The Racial Wealth Gap. Let me turn up my volumes. All right. The Color of Money, Black Banks, and the Racial Wealth Gap by Meshra Baradaran. I believe that's how she says her name. I'm sorry, Mersa Baradaran. Mersa Baradaran. All right, I'm going to read from two chapters, one this week and one next week. And I'm reading from the chapter, The New Deal for White America. Now you're going to see, you get an idea of why this country is in the condition it's in, why one of its three original citizens is in the condition that they're in. I'm going to read more about Native Americans. We pretty much know why they're in the condition they're in. For some reason, we think that because some laws were passed in the 1960s that black people should be in a better condition. Just getting some water. I usually transport these to glass. Try not to leave my water in the plastic too much. The New Deal for White America. The New Deal changed America's legal and political landscape in myriad ways. But perhaps nothing changed more radically than the nation's banking and credit markets. Unfortunately, most of the significant New Deal policies were administered in such a way as to maintain the South's racial hierarchy, which meant an almost categorical exclusion of blacks from government subsidies. The bulk of the New Deal reforms can accurately be described as white affirmative action because state resources were used to provide direct financial advantages to white Americans at the expense of other racial groups. And listen, everything south of Canada is south. We need to stop pretending that the North was the saints, racial saints. No. And this is what happens. This is why black people don't trust programs. The one time that we did make out in 2020, when those programs were actually given to all the people that they said, and maybe because of the pandemic, there was no time for administrators to figure out a way not to give it to blacks. So that's what we need. Could you imagine if the New Deal had went to everybody, all of the United States citizens, what the condition black people would be in? And this outcome was no accident. The only way Roosevelt can enact his progressive platform was with the backing of the Senate Southern Democrats. And this strong, influential, and coherent political wing of the party was adamant that their economic structure and racial hierarchy be protected. Though Southern legislatures were a minority, their unified bloc gave them outsized influence in their own party and allowed them to hold most of the senior committee positions in Congress. Nothing could be done without the blessing of the Southern wing. Roosevelt had to make a difficult choice: equal treatment of the races or large-scale historic social reforms. He chose the latter, and the choice had long-lasting effects. Left out. But I tell you again, 2020, that was the year that we're making a great reset. And you can't reset without doing something with us. One way or the other. Either you're going to give us the resources we need, access to the resources we need, or get rid of us. It's not clear which way we're going. 2020, it was clear that we was going to be given the resources, but now with Biden and these people, it's not clear. Without explicit racial exclusions, the laws were crafted in such a way as to exclude most blacks from the social welfare programs. For example, most blacks in the South were farm workers and domestic workers. My mother was what you call domestic. She did days work, which means she raised white people's children and cleaned their houses. In devising, and they loved her as family, but when my mother died, they had nothing for the rest of us. Nothing for her when she got sick and couldn't clean the house anymore. In devising legislation that regulated work hours, enabled unions set minimum wages, and established Social Security, and Southern Bloc excluded both groups, and thus the majority of black Southerners from the protective legislation. The purpose of these exclusions, as expressed by Southern legislators, was to maintain the inferior status of black laborers in the South in the Southern economy. Speaking in opposition to setting a minimum for farm wages, Florida Representative James Mark Wilcox explains, there is another matter of great importance in the South, and that is the problem of our Negro labor. There has always been a difference in the wage scale of white and colored labor. Fixing wages might work on some sections of the United States, but those of us who know the true situation know that it just will not work in the South. You cannot put the Negro and the white man on the same basis and get away with it. Most often, Southern senators did not even have to speak against the legislation. They used their seniority positions on Senate committees to make sure bills were drafted in such a way as to exclude blacks. Otherwise, a bill would never reach the floor for a vote. According to the NAACP, the legislation aimed at protecting workers against hostile labor conditions as, quote, like a sieve with holes just big enough for the majority of Negroes to fall through. I was talking to someone about why black people can't seem to have relationships, good relationships, families, wives, and husbands, and why we haven't. We're trying to, this is our reality. This is what we're functioning in to this day. We're trying to have personal relationships inside this social construct without admitting that we're in this social construct or without even recognizing that it exists. And I know I've spoken to black women again, and they will tell me, yeah, I know that, but what does that have to do with us? And there is no us outside of this. And this is why our families can't get along. This is why our couples can't get along. They must always, every second of every day, understand that they're operating in this. But we don't do it. We pretend. Where blacks could not be left out, the Southern Bloc ensured that the laws would be administered locally, where officials would allocate benefits in accordance with the racial order. One administrator of the Federal Emergency Relief Administration said that he had to tailor relief to accommodate the demands of Southern plantation owners for cheap farm labor by curtailing the level of relief payments to agricultural laborers and sharecroppers. This was done across the New Deal programs to exclude the large majority of blacks from relief measures and the newly created social safety net, a result characterized as a form of policy apartheid. Remember, policy is more important than everything. It's more important than their personality, than their symbolism, than all of that stuff. The policy is what it matters. One of the reasons, and this is crazy because this is a madman, but under Trump, with the pandemic deal, the IRS sent their checks out to everyone who qualified. When you get things under Biden, you have to fill out 1,000 pieces of paper. And again, I'm not saying Trump was in charge of that, because I'm sure he didn't care about what was going on. He doesn't care. He's there to make money for himself. But the reality is the reality. Under his administration, the funds went out. Biden came in, the funds stopped. He plunged 40% more children back into poverty after Trump took them out of poverty. I'm not saying he's going to do that. Trump is going to do that again. Trump is going to win. Make no mistake about it. So we don't know what kind of hell is going to be wrought on us. But this is the reality that people are looking at. Like, wait a minute. I know for business, my corporation, I know someone who got a $10,000 grant. My business also got a grant. When I went on the SBA website, they had grants and loans. When Biden came into office, the grants turned into loans. And one of the grants we got, they changed it into a loan. That's what I'm saying. You guys, you wondering why. And that was the first time I ever saw black people get anything from the government that was helpful without having to be at absolute zero. Because that's what the Democrats will do. They'll give you something when you have absolutely nothing and you're sleeping on a train and you have no food or something like that. You have to be stripped of everything and your humanity, and you have to go to them. And you still have to fill out multiple paperwork and deal with multiple agencies. People are tired of that. One pivotal outcome of these labor protecting exclusions, and specifically regarding the right to collective action, was that the left black workers powerless to organize and demand better working conditions. The result not only hurt black workers, it gave white workers a leg up as the union movement achieved monumental improvements in workers' rights for their members. Through collective action, white workers gained a voice and a seat at the bargaining table, while black workers were effectively silenced. So we can't trust the unions. Again, we don't get involved in a lot of things because we've been slighted in a lot of things. And it makes it look like we're lazy or just don't want to be involved or we're too pessimistic, but this is the history of it. Now, I think that, you're going to have your own unions and your own things. And you don't have to be racially, but just if you're a person that's left out from the mainstream one, you're going to have to develop your own. And usually it's going to break down on ethnic lines. These exclusions drove a wedge between black and white working classes as black workers became a point of contention between labor and employers. Often when a union and an employer were in a labor dispute, black workers were recruited to cross the picket line to fill the whites' places. Black workers thus came to represent strikebreakers who posed a threat to union negotiations, which resulted to acts of open hostility and violence by union members toward the black workers. As a measure of goodwill to boost labor relations, it was customary for companies to charter trains to ship blacks back south as more blacks left the boll weevil infested cotton fields of the South for the promise of work in northern industry. They faced factories infested with racial animosity, where they could have joined together and draw more strength from numbers. Blacks were scapegoated in industrial labor struggles because they were left out of union membership. And there you go. We'll stop there. This is another thing that people have to realize. Black women, for the most part, have always had some kind of stable employment, rather even as a domestic worker. Black men have never had stable employment unless we work for ourselves. Even when we had to do grunt work, sometimes they hire us, sometimes they lay us off. It's a back and forth. Unless we're doing some of the grittiest stuff. My wife knew a grave digger. That was the black guy that was still digging graves. So and another thing, we're only allowed in certain industries en masse. So all you black women looking for this corporate black man who's established and in the private industry. You can keep looking, but they exist. There's some out there, a handful. I would be surprised at this point if 1,000 black men are in positions of power, like managerial positions or anything. I would be surprised if that's even the case. I don't know. I think I know one, and he works for government, and it's all going to be in government jobs. Private sector, and less, they work for themselves. And more of us are doing that. We work for ourselves. And then we take advantage of tax codes and government things like that. So these are things that are going to have to be recognized. This is one of the great books. What are the realities? I'm not sure how many people would be interested in this, because I'm not sure how many people in the United States are interested in reality anymore, but this is one of the great ones. I know it's a top seller and one referred to, but on the ground, what they call everyday people, they need to get into this and at least get into the concept of what's going on. Structural reality. If you want to support the podcast, you know what to do. Click the links, give directly, or become a sponsor. Until next time, it's rough out here, so try to be safe and try to be careful.